I had made a massive investment to turn my property into a social housing project. I would pay for the electrical cables, telephone cables, gas and water pipes, the sewers, and the roads. The municipality would buy it for €1 million. Due to the 2007 to 2008 financial crisis, the municipality refused to buy it and prohibited social housing to be erected there. They screwed me over big time. The entire property had been valued at €3.5 million, but now that you were no longer allowed to build on it, I had to sell my mansion for €632,000. This included a Cold War bunker and water well. I needed a new house and fast. It needed to be in the same village, outside the blast radii of possible nuclear targets at the Braschatt airfield, Derna Airport, and the NATO Reserve Airfield in Malzoersel, yet still close enough to a nearby wartime bunker. So I bought a haunted house. With the help of the local historical society, the Belgian Federal Police, and the military archives, we were able to figure out the ghosts were 4 Belgian soldiers who died when an ammunition train exploded on October 4, 1914. Nice guys. I bought them a TV, they can operate the remote. I can't watch TV as I am an epileptic, and put a laptop in the living room, with shortcuts to French radio stations and French newspapers. We found a way to communicate. Thanks to an idea from the police, I asked detailed questions, in French, and add boxes with yes or no they can mark with a pencil. They also play with the cat and get to rub his belly, which I'm not allowed to do. The cat can clearly see them. Sometimes they throw spoons across the living room and he goes and fetches them. Initially, making contact was not easy. They clearly wanted to draw my attention and did so by producing thundering noises, as though the ceiling was coming down, or producing the sound of footsteps. They would also move objects and turn on electrical systems, such as the stereo, the radio, a computer, a cell phone, but never anything dangerous like an oven or a toaster. They would throw spoons around but never knives or forks. They could show themselves as dark apparitions, but I think this requires a lot of effort. I usually did this when I found human remains in the garden, in Belgium. If the remains are less than 10 centimeters long, you have to throw them in the trash. This led a friend of mine to the conclusion they were friendly, and just trying to make contact. Once that was done, life became pretty agreeable. They play with the cat, wake me if I left a window open and it is raining inside. They used to do this with the sound of footsteps, but now they operate the light switches as well, and have on 2 occasions scared of burglars. They can manipulate small objects such as a pencil, a remote control, or a computer mouse, and pet the cat. They tried larger objects, feeding the cat, but that didn't work out very well. They mainly manifest themselves in the living room, which I hardly use, and can watch TV, play music, and read online newspapers, and play with the cat. But can go anywhere in the house or garden. I don't think they experience time the same way we do. Sometimes there is a lot of activity, sometimes the activity is pretty low. Or could be that a lot of activity wears them out. My first house after moving out of my parents was a lovely, quaint little 14th century thatched roof cottage in a beautiful, but very isolated village. From nearly day one, weird things started happening. I had been bleaching the cupboards and drawers in the kitchen, and leaving them all open to dry after scrubbing them. Went upstairs to do something. When I came back down, all the cabinets and drawers were closed. I rationalized it as me forgetting closing them myself. Got a puppy. She would refuse to go upstairs and would often stare at the steps as if watching someone walking up them. We didn't have much furniture as it was our first house, and always left the TV remote on a built-in dresser in the living room. One day it was missing. We searched everywhere and decided that the puppy must have run off with it, and probably buried it in the garden. Ordered a new remote. On the day it arrived, the old remote was back exactly where we always left it, on the dresser. We were sitting in the car on the driveway one night listening to an article on the radio. There was a flash that caught our eyes, and we looked up to see that our bedroom light had been turned on whilst we were sitting outside. Neighbors told us that they had contacted the letting agents several times, as before we moved in there were lights going on in the empty cottage at odd times, and that there had been a lot of noise from what sounded like someone running up the stairs. Never had the feeling that we were unwelcome or of anything malign, but we did not renew our tenancy once the year was up. Edit. Bonus scary occurrence. Since moving to the town center to be close to the office, my best friend lives a few doors down from me. I'm at 41, she's at 53. After a night out, 5 of us went back to her flat in the early hours of the morning to continue drinking and discuss ordering some food, which didn't happen. We were all early 20s Brits. Kebabs were the finishing line, not to be considered if drinking was still possible. Anyway, she'd been saying for a while how there were strange things happening in her flat, smelling cigarette smoke, she and visitors feeling like there was someone standing behind them, and hearing scratching noises at the walls. This particular night we were all in her lounge debating whether to order food and joking with each other. We were laughing loudly at something when suddenly there was a crash from the kitchen, then the kitchen door slammed hard. We went in there, and there was a sieve inexplicably about a foot from the door. My friend insisted she'd put it in a cupboard, and even had it been on the draining board it would have been 6 feet from where we found it. It was perfectly upright, not like it had spun, it was rested completely still on the small base. The kitchen door had also been propped wide open by a ceramic doorstop, not something that could be easily shifted with a draft, or vibration from us laughing or moving around. It had certainly stood up to us girls getting ready earlier in the night, and arguably being much more boisterous since it wasn't the early hours of the morning. No windows were open, and all of us had been in the lounge. That was a scary occurrence I try not to think about, particularly as there's a story about a town not far from my own where apparently a poltergeist roams an entire street, not just one house. My friend was freaked out enough to try and get a priest to do a blessing on her flat. She ran into the same issues we did in our cottage. It's not something done, or encouraged, anymore. She has a new partner who is very religious and prays regularly in the flat, and I don't think she's been troubled for a while. I have lived in haunted houses over the years. As a kid my family moved into a large house that turned out to be haunted. I was young, 5 years old, don't remember much, but I remember my parents were worried about it. I can say it wasn't bad because I was never afraid of the shadows I can remember seeing on the walls, and I laughed when the door would slowly open. We moved when my mother was expecting my twin sisters. We lived there for only a couple years. I was 8 when we left/moved. Fast forward to my teen years, 2 of my friends lived in a haunted house. On many occasions when I visited things would happen, objects moving, noises and footsteps in other rooms or upstairs. Even saw a shadow a couple times. There was no bad feelings or any sense of danger, just a minor fear of the unknown. Now later in life, after moving to Las Vegas, I have lived in several places, 2 of which are haunted. One that I consider very haunted are the apartments opposite the Moulin Rouge. In the mid-90s, long before it burned down, my wife was the manager and I worked elsewhere. She can and will tell many stories of things that she had seen and heard about. I myself saw a few things that raised my eyebrows. Our last house, we lived in for over 12 years, had a couple spirits that would show up from time to time. Again, nothing bad. Objects moved, a shadow playing in the hall, feelings of being watched, noises in other rooms, stuff like that. One thing that I kind of liked was an old doll that came our way. It was 7 to 8 inches big, and people would say it was looking at them, even smiled or frowned, on occasion. I put it on top our china case so it could look around and watch TV. I know all this sounds insane. I think it does too, but these things didn't happen all the time. It would come and go, a week or so it would be very active, then nothing. Months would go by and we would forget about it, then it seemed to come back and remind us that they were still around. Except the doll, it seemed to look around a lot. I don't think it is something that we ever got used to, just tolerated. My family and I lived in a haunted house for about 25 years, and we even knew who the ghost was. It was the late son of the family from whom we bought the house. He was developmentally delayed and had developed leukemia and died at the age of 12. Everybody saw him sooner or later. Mostly the adults saw him walking away from them, and the kids saw him walking toward them. Once the whole family of 2 adults and 3 kids were in the living room watching TV when I glanced up to see someone walk across the kitchen and into the bathroom. Since everybody was in the living room watching a football game, I told my husband some kid just went into the bathroom. Please see who it is. I figured it was one of the neighbor kids who came in the back door. He didn't find anyone there. Later I saw him in the basement, while I was doing laundry, walking away from me as usual and semi-transparent. Mostly he was just there. He probably wanted to play with my kids. Sleepovers were always unusual, with the kids' friends saying they saw a strange kid in the house. Sometimes he would touch them, but mostly he just hung around. When we sold the house and moved, I actually invited him to go to the light, or failing that to come with us, but apparently he chose the light since nobody has seen him at our new home for the last 13 years, and I haven't heard of him being at our old house. One time, my newlywed gal and I headed out to the country to look at a small farmstead. When we arrived, we noticed that all the buildings on the farm were so badly deteriorated, they would need to be knocked down and cleaned up. Strike one. Well, I said to my new wife, let's go look inside the house, it still looks livable. We entered the old farmhouse. It looked like the last resident had left in a hurry. Strike two. We decided to check the upstairs. As soon as we got upstairs, it just felt off. Then, having inspected the upstairs, I glanced outside through a window next to the staircase, and immediately I was filled with dread. The window was covered in dead flies. My gal and I ran outside. She had felt it too, that overpowering sense of dread. We ran back to the car, both sensing an entity chasing us. Strike three, we are out. I didn't even believe in anything supernatural, but she did. It felt so bad. Before she died of cancer at only 29, she would tell this story whenever the opportunity came around. I know this story was not that scary, and I'm also aware of a certain vibration caused by some appliances has caused the sense of dread. So it could have been the furnace. I only know we never returned to find out. I was living with my mom, stepfather, and my two younger brothers. My parents decided to move into a decent 3-bedroom house located in Reliance, Tennessee. My brothers shared one of the bedrooms downstairs and my parents had the other. I was upstairs in an attic that was modified into a surprisingly nice bedroom. Whenever we first moved in, I liked it, and everything was normal. But things started to happen. My first experience with Ron, I was sitting at the foot of my bed after the bus let me off, going through my things, trying to decide what homework to do first. I laid my notebook beside me as I continued to dig through my bag, and after I find the pen I was searching for, I reached down beside me to grab my notebook, and it was gone. I searched all around my bed until I gave up, very confused as to where it went all by itself, and started to head downstairs to get a new one. Then I realized that it was laying on the floor outside my door frame. I was really confused at this point and started questioning my sanity. Embarrassed to say anything, I kept it to my crazy self and just hoped that nothing else would happen. Well, something else happened, and it happened pretty soon. Only, this time to my youngest brother, 7 years old. He came running out of the bathroom yelling that a boy was in there. My stepdad was the first one at the bathroom door, and nothing. My brother was absolutely terrified and swore that a boy was sitting naked in the bathtub with his knees pulled up close to his chest, holding his head, crying. My parents didn't know if they should believe him or not. They had the same look of confusion I had, and just tried to calm him. Couple months passed without anything else happening. Then he came back, in my room. I had already been in bed for about an hour, read my book for about 30 minutes before rolling over to sleep. Soon after, I heard a shuffle, then a light knock, then another shuffle, and another knock. I was shock stiff as I heard shuffles and knocks throughout my room. My bed is on the far side of the room away from the door. Then the noises stopped, and I heard, "Ron," in a semi-loud childlike voice. I couldn't do shit. Honestly, I think I stopped breathing in that moment, and I'm getting goosebumps right now just from typing this. But then, the little shit spoke again, "Ron." Something sparked in me that time, and I leaped out of my bed without even taking the time to remove my cover. I absolutely sprinted to the door and hovered down my steps, straight into my parents' room. I woke them freaking out, and they actually believed me, unlike when my brother encountered him, since I was older and have a reputation for being truthful. We got my brothers, and we all slept in the living room that night. My mom refused to go back in that house, and so did I. We ended up staying with my grandparents for a while until we found something with a little less ghosts. I grew up in a house that was said to be haunted. It felt kind of icky. A young boy had died in the back bedroom many years before my family bought the place. From what I have been able to determine, the boy wasn't the victim of any kind of foul play. He was simply brought home immediately after a terrible accident. That was in the days when a doctor would typically have come to the house for something of that nature rather than having the victim taken to a hospital, so the boy just died at home in a time when home deaths were common. For whatever reason, I did always feel a sinister presence in that particular room. I did not like to look into mirrors in there for fear of seeing a ghostly being peering over my shoulder. I moved into the room when my sister abandoned it for a college dorm, so I suppose its eeriness wasn't enough to keep me in the smaller room I had occupied before. I always slept with the lights on in the new room, though. I was not the only one who got a strange feeling in that back bedroom. Visiting relatives staying there often complained of a feeling of being watched and of lights that moved around in the dark. A couple of cousins even left for a hotel in the middle of the night after being frightened by something in that room. Later, when I returned home to visit as a married woman, my usually brave and level-headed husband admitted to being frightened in there, too. He even insisted we sleep with the lights on whenever we ended up in that particular room. My parents swore they never felt a thing out of the ordinary anywhere in the house and laughed at the relatives who complained of strange goings-on in the back bedroom. But then, one night when he was alone in the house, my very pragmatic father heard someone coming down the stairs. He got up to see who it was and saw a woman dressed in old-fashioned clothes descending the staircase. As he raised his gaze from her feet toward her face, she disappeared. My family sold the house after my parents died. I haven't asked the new owners if they've had any sense of it being haunted. We were desperate for a bigger house and it was 2 houses down from my mother, so we took it. The people who lived there before us only stayed a few months, then up and left out of the blue. Another stayed only a month and left. I think I know why. The manhole used to open on its own. It was in the laundry. It happened so much that I made my ex put locks on it. The laundry and that back part of the house was where it felt the worst. When we would boil the kettle, the lid would open and it would just keep boiling, and boiling until you took the kettle off the stand or unplugged it. Bought a new kettle and it did the same thing. I was in my bedroom putting makeup on when the sliding door to my wardrobe slid open and out the corner of my eye I saw a small child run in there, then the door closed. I thought it was my son, so I asked him, "What are you doing in there?" At that moment my son walked into my room to ask for a snack. We left the bedroom real quick. The bathroom always smelt like sulfur. I thought maybe there was something wrong with the drains, so I was always cleaning them, trying to get rid of the smell, but it would never leave. When in the shower in that same bathroom, I'd always hear what sounded like party music in the distance, no matter what time it was, morning or night. I was watching TV in the lounge one day and heard really loud, heavy footsteps run from the laundry to the front door, in the hallway. Called out to my son and he was in his room watching TV, so it wasn't him. My son's bedroom was right next to the laundry. He started waking up every night crying. He would see a black shadow person. He was terrified. He would get up to sleep in my bedroom most of the time 'cause he hated his room at night. I felt random cold breezes that literally moved my hair in my son's bedroom. In bed one night I felt my son crawl into bed with me and lay next to me. I rolled over to put my arm around him to hug him and my arm went straight down and hit the mattress. No one was there. I was terrified. I heard weird screams in that house. I don't know how to describe them. A woman screamed, but it sounded echoed but wasn't echoing? I have no idea. I heard it twice. I had a dream that me and my son were sitting on my bed, and I had a feeling to look under the bed, so while still on the bed I poked my head down to look under there. I looked from side to side and saw nothing. But then a scream so deep and loud came from every direction under my bed. I felt the hot breath on my face in the dream and woke up boiling hot straight away. I had sleep paralysis for the first and only time in that house. I was having a nap during the day and randomly woke up to the blankets covering my face. I couldn't move. I felt claustrophobic, then felt something on me, watching me. I was trying to call out to my ex but couldn't. I was screaming in my mind. Eventually I fell back asleep. I was watching TV one night and saw a weird clear shadow walk from one side of the TV to the other. As it walked past, there was static in front of the TV. My ex was a skeptic, until he finally saw something other than the kettle, the manhole, and the music in the bathroom. One night we were in the lounge watching TV. When he had to go to the bathroom, I saw him walk into the hallway to go to the bathroom. Then he reversed and walked back and stared at the laundry, out of sight from where I was sitting. He was white as a sheet. I straight away said, "You saw it, didn't you?" He came back into the lounge looking like he was going to faint, and told me next to my son's room in front of the laundry door he saw a little boy whose face was so white, and it was only the top half of him, no legs. We both went and got my son and put him in our room, then went to bed. I saged the place and kept telling it to leave as it's not welcome in my house, showing no fear. But I felt scared the whole time and felt like it thought it was funny what I was doing. I felt it follow me around every time I did that. Ended up leaving that house. I felt like there was a child and an evil being there. But I've heard demons can present themselves in the form of a child to try to trick you, so who knows? My father's youngest brother had bought a new car, a gray Vanguard. He was delighted to have wheels for the first time in his life, eager to try it out on a road trip. My father's youngest brother and a friend, I honestly can't remember his name, but let's call him Dirk, decided to visit my grand-sister Layla in Cape Town. It was a long trip from Kimberley, and a good test for the car. Dirk had family living somewhere in the Great Karoo, huge, arid tracts of land, miles and miles of nothing but scrub, with an acacia tree dotted here and there, so they would have a place to stop over and spend the night. No hotels, or sleeping in the car this time, and Dirk knew the way, so no getting lost either. My father's youngest brother and Dirk planned their trip eagerly. Dirk assured him that there would be no problem with the stay over at the farmhouse. All had been arranged, per letter, very few house phones in those days. So very early one morning, they set out with a picnic basket and coffee, all packed. Their journey into the heart of the Karoo was uneventful, but not too boring. Along the way, they noted large herds of springbok and sheep grazing in the veldt fields. Now and then, they would pass a donkey cart piled high with firewood, and friendly folk who waved to them. Occasionally, they would see a caracal or black-backed jackal dart across the road in front of them. They rolled up at the farmhouse before dusk, and were greeted enthusiastically by Dirk's family. The warm smell of lamb stew simmering on the hob assailed their nostrils. Soon they sat down with the family in the large kitchen to eat and exchange news. Lamps were lit and talk went on into the night. There was still no electricity in outlying areas such as these. When bedtime eventually came, the man of the house apologized to my father's youngest brother for not having a guest room. Would he mind sleeping in the enclosed stoop veranda? He replied that he would not mind at all, being grateful that he would have a bed to sleep in and a roof over his head. Everyone went off to bed. My father's youngest brother found that the single bed was quite comfortable, and soon drifted off to sleep, despite the unaccustomed night noises, being rather tired after his day of driving. Not long after he had fallen asleep, he was awakened by the cold. The temperature plummets at night, under these cloudless skies. He discovered that his sheet and blanket had fallen to the floor. He leaned out of bed, retrieving the bedclothes, and fell asleep once more. Not too long after, he was again awakened by intense chill to find the bedclothes once more on the floor. This time, he suspected that his pal was playing tricks on him, and looked inside the doorway to the Vui's sitting room where formal entertaining took place, to see if he could see anyone. Nobody was around. This time, my father's youngest brother made the bed properly, making sure that the blanket and sheet were well tucked in, slid down into the bed, making sure that he didn't untuck the bedclothes, and went to sleep again. Sometime later, he woke again to find his covers on the floor. By now, he was sure that Dirk or one of the family was pulling a prank on him. He proceeded to wrap himself up, like a mummy, in the bedclothes and slept well till dawn. The next morning, while sitting down to a sumptuous breakfast of mutton chops, fried eggs, freshly baked bread with farm butter and fruit preserves, the family solicitously inquired as to how my father's youngest brother had slept. He thought, "Aha! Here it comes." He replied that he had slept very well, not giving them a glimmer of the night's disturbances. The farm folk looked surprised and looked askance at one another, while he grinned inwardly, till they told him that he was the first person in years to spend the entire night sleeping on the stoop. Only then was the whole story trotted out. The grandfather of the family had always slept on the stoop, before it was enclosed. One dark night, a native farm laborer had crept up and murdered the old man in his bed. Ever since then, nobody could get a peaceful night's rest there. My brother and I were living in the family home in New York, right after my dad passed away. We were going through the insurance documents and other important papers. I was upstairs in my dad's bedroom, my brother was down in the kitchen. Suddenly, I felt this presence. It wasn't scary, it was familiar. I realized it was my dad. There was something about the way I felt I was being watched. I knew it was him. I started to run downstairs to tell my brother that Dad was in the house. I didn't make it to the kitchen. My brother was coming around the corner in the dining room. We both said at the exact same time, "Dad's here." We just stood looking at each other for a few minutes, trying to process how both of us could have felt him at the exact same time and said it at the exact same time. The really weird thing is my brother doesn't have this ability. I think maybe he was in shock afterward. He didn't say much for the rest of the night. I'm used to feeling their presence. It usually doesn't bother me. Except one time, I can actually say I was scared as hell. My mother left my dad when I was 17. She remarried the following year. I didn't like the man she married. He felt the same about me. I went to school with his kids, which was strange for all of us. At any rate, this man was a perfectionist. He had the worst case of OCD I ever saw. After they were married a few years, I started going to visit my mother. I too have OCD, so everything has to be just so. My mother is the exact opposite. Whenever I went to visit her, I would end up cleaning. Her husband got sick with cancer, and by the time they found it, he only had a few months to live. After he passed away, I went up to stay with my mother for a few days. We hadn't had the funeral yet. My mother went next door to her friends, which meant I was in her house alone. I was cleaning in the kitchen when I suddenly felt this coldness. I looked over at the door. It was closed. It kept feeling colder, and it was getting dark, which made it feel worse. Then I felt it. It was my mother's husband. I could even smell his pipe tobacco. He was right behind me, watching me. I kept sweeping the floor, like I hadn't noticed anything, but I was trembling badly. I've never had that reaction before when I felt a presence. I was actually scared. I knew he never liked me in life. I thought I'm just going to turn and face him. But instead I heard myself say, "I'm doing the best I can, cleaning, Sam, can you please let me finish?" And he was gone, the smell, and the feeling he was watching me. A couple of minutes later, my mother came in. I told her what happened. She said she already knew he was there. That's why she went to her friends. I informed her I would not be staying in her house. She was welcome to come to my house to stay. We got out of there as fast as possible. Not long after, she put the house up for sale. She was staying with me most of the time anyway. But I never stayed in her house alone again, and I never spent the night there again. It happened during a stay at a house in the suburbs of Newport Beach, California. It wasn't a very old house. After the experiences that I encountered in the house, I researched it, and apparently, it was not even built before the 80s. So, I am thinking that whatever is here was conjured up by some means, maybe a Ouija board, seance, or something of that sort, or it happened on the grounds before the house was actually built there, but who's to know? One of my friends at the time was asked to house sit for the family that owned it. They had moved to Florida and just left the house to sit and sell. They had asked her to make sure that it was clean and tidy and smelling good for when realtors came to show the house. Experience number 1 happened during a game of hide and seek. Let me clarify that we were in our early 20s and dating 2 fellows that were also in their 20s. My friend and I had decided to take them to chill and eat pizza, watch movies, and just generally hang out one day at our new haven that we were responsible for watching over. It was really a sweet gig for my friend, or so we thought at the time. None of us actually had a place of our own, and since we were all living with our parents at the time, this was a nice place to chill out and have our own space even if it was for a few hours. It was nice at first before all the scary, crazy stuff started happening. Anyways, I'll get back to the hide and seek game. I don't remember who was supposed to be it, but it wasn't me. I went and hid in an upstairs room on the side of the house. It had an angled ceiling like an attic room. It was obvious that it had been a child's playroom. There was a shelf all around the middle of the room with stuffed animals and dolls sitting on the shelf all the way around the room. This didn't bother me. There was one window facing the front street. I proceeded to get behind another toy box in the corner, with the lights off. I was being very quiet so my friends would not find me. I could hear whoever was looking for us saying, "Ready or not, here I come." Well, several minutes went by, and I could hear my friends downstairs talking and being found one by one. They were talking, but I could not make out what they were saying, but eventually, I didn't hear much anymore. I was thinking that they gave up looking for me. I was sitting still, very still, waiting when I started feeling like I was not alone. I was definitely feeling like something was right beside me. I got really creeped out but stayed a few more minutes. I then got so weirded out that I decided that I was getting the heck out of there. I tried not to panic and walked out and went downstairs where my friends were all talking. They had totally lost all interest in finding me. They would later, of course. That room later proved to be the very den of whatever the heck was in that house. Later on, the door to that room slammed shut by itself, and something ran down the hall. The door slamming incident happened on New Year's Eve after I made the statement, "Well, it's 2 minutes till the new year." Within 10 seconds after I had made that statement, the door to that room slammed so hard it shook the ceiling over us. After that, someone ran down the hall with heavy steps. We all looked at each other with ashen white faces. What the heck had we heard? There was nobody upstairs. It was only us on the bottom floor toasting to the new year about to roll in. One of the guys volunteered to go upstairs and check it out. We warned against it, but he insisted. After he came back downstairs, his face was completely without color, kind of like the blood had just drained out of his face. He didn't speak of it ever again. One night, many years ago, my family of 4 experienced a nightmarish ordeal in Lawrence, Kansas. I was just 6 months old at the time, lying peacefully in my crib. My mother, Mary, went to check on me in the dead of night, only to encounter a figure by my crib. Assuming it was my father, John, she left the room. To her horror, she soon discovered that my father was elsewhere in the house. Panic set in as she realized someone else was with me. Rushing into the nursery, she screamed at the intruder to stay away from me. The figure turned around, and through narrowed yellow eyes stared at her. An invisible force pinned her to the wall, and she began to rise, screaming in terror. My father, alerted by her screams, raced to the nursery only to find it empty, except for me in my crib. Something dripped onto him, and when he looked up, he found my mother, Mary, pinned to the ceiling. In an instant, she burst into flames, and the house began to smolder. My father grabbed me and raced outside. In the hallway, he handed me over to my older brother, Dean, instructing him to take me outside. As my father attempted to save my mother, the house became a fiery inferno, and my mother perished. Fast forward to the present day, and my brother Dean and I are drawn back to Lawrence. We discover that a new family has moved into the haunted house. Seeking the help of a psychic named Missouri, we learn that not 1 but 2 spirits inhabit the place. As we work to cleanse the property, the poltergeist attacks violently, throwing Dean across the room and attempting to strangle me with a cord. Just as it seems hopeless, another spirit appears. A young woman, beautiful and kind, intervenes, holding back the poltergeist so we can complete the protection of the house. She sacrifices the last of her spirit energy to shield us. As the poltergeist fades, so does she, but not before Dean stares at her in disbelief and utters, "Mom?" The horror of that night continues to haunt us, even in the presence of a benevolent spirit that briefly resembled our lost mother.